and out of love, never get enough. We never seem to get older.
I don't know what was more unsettling, hearing Shawn Mendes' voice coming out of a very large crocodile, or the fact that Senor Valente is played by the same actor who plays the serial killer in No Country for Old Men. Sony Pictures. Make it make sense. Dr. Daley here, and I watch Lyle Crocodile so that you don't have to. When I hear Shawn Mendes' voice, I don't think crocodile. However, if someone were to remake Giraffes Can't Dance, I 150,000 trillion% can hear Shawn Mendes' voice playing Gerald the giraffe. Now that makes sense to me. Let me start off with a little bit of information. Did you know that the very first book is not actually Lyle Crocodile? Instead, it is actually The House on 88th Street, which was published in 1962. Lyle Crocodile is actually the sequel, and it was published in 1965. Lyle the Crocodile series was created by author-illustrator Bernard Weber, who passed away in 2013. There are a total of 10 books in the series, with the last being published in 1998, which is titled Lyle at Christmas. Even prior to that, in 1987, it was adapted into a musical animation by HBO, which I actually remember loving as a child. But I watched it again recently, and I'm not entirely sure how true that statement is. However, I do have nostalgia for Lyle Crocodile, so my assumption is that I really did love it as a child. Now let's get into a synopsis of the film. Here's the fast version. Senor Valente is a washed-up magician. He is looking for an exotic animal to spice up his stage performance. He goes to a pet store and finds Lyle singing to himself in a cage. Valente purchases Lyle, gives him a home under the pretense that Lyle performs with him so that he can make lots of money. Valente barters his home for an opportunity to perform. Then it is revealed that Lyle actually suffers from stage fright. Now Valente must go off and make money while Lyle lives at home. The Prim family moves in and discovers Lyle. They become a happy family. Of course, there is some conflict before that. Valente then returns for Lyle and tries to get him to perform once again. Obviously, Senor Valente did not learn his lesson the first time because Lyle is still afraid of performing on stage. Meanwhile, this whole time there is this grumpy neighbor, Mr. Grumps, and his cat Loretta. Mr. Grumps is fed up with all of the noise and family life that is occurring at East 88th Street, and he wants the Prim family gone. Then Valente betrays Lyle because of his greed, which is fair because that was the pretense from the beginning of the film. Mr. Grumps calls animal control because now he has evidence that there is a crocodile living in the apartment, and Lyle is hauled off to the zoo. Then they all become sad. Valente then regrets his decision and convinces Josh to help him break out Lyle out of the zoo. They break Lyle out. Josh believes that if people can just hear Lyle sing, they won't be afraid of him. He drives through the streets of New York to get Lyle onto the stage of the show, Show Us What You Got. And while on stage, Lyle finally overcomes his stage fright and begins to sing. Everybody loves him. Of course they do. He's Lyle. Then a month later, the Prim family is taken to court by Mr. Grumps to see if Lyle can actually stay in the home. At the last minute, Senor Valente waltzes into the courtroom and has a deed that says that exotic animals can indeed live in that particular house. They win the case and everyone is happy, and then the Prim family goes on vacation, and the last scene looks kind of like an Audi commercial with everyone packed in the car and they're speeding down the streets of New York off to who knows where.
This synopsis might have been longer than I thought.
Now that the recap is out of the way, I can focus on some more interesting elements and also question some of the choices that were made in this adaptation. Lyle Crocodile, the film, is actually a mashup of The House on East 88th Street and Lyle Crocodile. In the house on East 88th Street, we are introduced to the Prim family, Mr. Prim, Mrs. Prim, and Joshua Prim. On the day they move into their new home, they find Lyle taking a bath in the upstairs bathroom. Mrs. Prim sees him first and becomes absolutely speechless. That's when Mr. Prim opens a door and finds out why his wife is unable to verbalize a sentence. Mrs. Prim rushes to open a window and Mr. Prim picks up the phone to call for help, but remembers that their phone service has not yet been connected. Then there is someone at the door. It is Senor Valente. He hands Joshua a note that says, "This will explain everything about the crocodile," and then he swiftly disappears. In the film, it is actually Josh who discovers Lyle first, unlike in the book where Mrs. Prim is the first to discover Lyle. In the film, Josh doesn't discover him in the bathtub. He actually discovers him in a glass case in the attic after hearing some commotion coming from upstairs. At that moment, Josh merely thinks that Lyle is taxidermied. It is not until their second encounter, after Lyle accidentally swallows Loretta, Mr. Grump's cat, that Lyle and Josh have their first major interaction. Their friendship begins here. Once Lyle regurgitates Loretta up first, they go on night dumpster dives and communicate through song. Lyle sings and Josh speaks. My question is, why doesn't Josh sing so that they can then sing together?
But let's not get off topic.
Perhaps you already know this, but in the film, Lyle actually does not speak. He can only sing. And that is different from the book because in the book, he doesn't sing or speak. He is actually completely nonverbal. In an interview by Cinema Blend, the directors Will Speck and Josh Gordon explained the rationale for singing only Lyle. They reasoned, "It was a conscious choice on our part. Hector leaves him with a digital player that has music on it early in the film. So that's our justification for how he taught himself these songs. I think for us, it was really important that we had a character where the other characters could infer a lot from him. I think Lyle is a great listener, and I think a lot of people just need that kind of space and partner in order to make changes, as opposed to being led completely. So I think for us, it's something that we thought was really a unique way to tell a story." Continuing with the house on East 88th Street. Lyle is well-loved and is well-known throughout the city. He goes shopping with Mrs. Prim, he goes to the park with the family, they play volleyball, they go on drives. The conflict in book 1 is that Senor Valente has come back to take Lyle on the road. In the book, Lyle doesn't actually suffer from stage fright. He does perform, it's just he eventually starts to miss the Prim family and starts to make his audience cry instead of laugh, kind of like Water for Chocolate. Right? So Lyle becomes a hindrance to their performance, and Senor Valente returns Lyle to the Prims, and of course, again, they live happily ever after. Until book 2, when Mr. Grumps and Loretta become a nuisance to the Prim family and also to Lyle. In Lyle, Crocodile, Lyle really wants to make friends with Loretta. However, she is completely terrified of him, which makes sense. He could eat her. Lyle tries to stay away from Loretta, but Mr. Grumps already has a vendetta against Lyle. One day, Lyle and Mrs. Prim unknowingly goes to the department store where Mr. Grumps works. They see Senor Valente, who coaxes Lyle into performing. Of course, they gather a large crowd, and then Mr. Grumps is fed up and fires Valente on the spot. Then the next day, Lyle is forced to go to the zoo, where he can again become a big hit with the visitors and manages actually to get along with the other crocodiles. Everyone is sad again. Valente decides to break Lyle out of the zoo. When they are driving home, Lyle then sees a house on fire and goes to save whoever is in there. And it turns out that it's actually the house of Mr. Grumps and Loretta, and he ends up saving the two of them. Everyone congratulates Lyle for his bravery, and he moves back into the Prim's home that night. Several days later, the Prim family throws Senor Valente a going-away party since he is traveling again, this time to Australia. And Mr. Grumps is in attendance, looking not so grumpy, actually. Mr. Grump notifies Valente that if he changes his mind about leaving, he will happily give him a job at the department store because, quote, "We need people with your kind of talent and ability." Everyone smiled happily, even Loretta. The end.
I haven't even gotten to my film analysis yet.
Let's make this quick. What I want to acknowledge is that the Lyle series is not actually about diversity and inclusion, interspecies friendship, and chosen kin, but the ticker is it maintains a 1960s cultural aesthetic where there is an expectation that Mrs. Prim is a stay-at-home mother, and she literally wears an apron every time she's at home. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but again, I want to make clear that this particular book was published in the 60s, again framed around American culture during that kind of 1960s cultural aesthetic. And when Mrs. Prim is not at home, she is a socialite, gathering for tea and spending time with friends and shopping. So when the film tries to do the same thing but has this agenda of diversity and inclusion, these kinds of aspects actually come off as careless and somewhat problematic. For instance, unlike in the book, Mrs. Prim in the film is actually Josh's stepmother and not his biological mother. And it is revealed that she is of Taiwanese heritage. She also has some sort of eating disorder or is working through her eating disorder, or maybe just working through her eating habits. I say this with caution because in the film, her eating habits do cause her a lot of stress and also causes her family stress. So that's why I'm calling it some sort of disorder, just because of the kind of way it's framed that is actually causing a lot of stress for the family. So it feels careless that her identity and her potential eating disorder is not very well handled in the film. As if someone said,
well, let's make the film inclusive.
We need a woman of color, and perhaps she can have a mental health issue.
Please feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think that this impacted the way that you saw the film? Other identities that seem to be considered inclusive is the fact that Josh also has a disorder, and it seems like he has some sort of anxiety disorder. As he goes to bed, he asks his AI machine what are the various noises that he's hearing, and it reports it back to him. He has anxiety around time, and if I'm remembering correctly, I think he also has some anxiety around food as well. Let's just say that he tends to be very calculated in the way that he relates to his surroundings. Again, so this was not the case in any of the original text. There were not these additional mental health issues besides the stress of finding a crocodile in one's home to push the conflict of a narrative forward. They seem to be used to just create some sort of conflict and then to be resolved in a really frivolous way. For instance, Mrs. Prim, after she develops a relationship with Lyle, begins to eat junk food again, as if to say,
I'm healed. See, I can eat chips and pizza without having any anxiety around it.
And it is the same with Josh and his anxiety and Mr. Prim with his low self-esteem. These aspects of their personality and embodiment don't get resolved with any real effort. The story just moves on, and I find that to be really unfortunate.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And as for Lyle, his worth from the beginning is attached to his ability to sing. Senor Valente purchased him for the sole fact to make money off of him. And when he could not, Senor Valente then abandoned and betrayed Lyle. And of course, this is like the most major plot line in the text. However, what confuses me is that at the end, Josh actually does the same thing to Lyle. He kind of perpetuates this notion that if Lyle can just sing, show the people what he's worth, then they won't be scared of him. Yet prior to this, Josh condemns Senor Valente for making Lyle some sort of object of entertainment. And then there Josh goes, barreling down the streets of New York, trying to get Lyle to get on the show, again to prove himself of being worthy of being left alone or having a safe home or having a real sense of agency in his life, and to convince people to stop being afraid of him. So again, Sony, I ask,
Make it make sense.
And what seems to be a little more weird is that Josh is actually able to accomplish what Senor Valente could not. Sure, it was only in this one time that Josh was kind of perpetuating this understanding that if Lyle can just sing, people won't be scared of him. But that one time was enough, and the one time happened at the end of the film. Lyle really just wanted a safe home, a safe space to lay his head, and technically that was the home he had grown up in, so it was the only real place of safety that he had known. As a result, for me, the original plot line of Mr. Grumps and Loretta being in a fire makes more sense for the relationship of Mr. Grumps and Loretta to be mended at the end of the film versus what actually happened at the end of the film, which is this court case. As a result, the end of Lyle, the Crocodile, the book, makes more sense to me in order to bring everything together, that there was this kind of reconciliation between Mr. Grumps and Loretta and Lyle because Lyle saved them, versus the ending of the film being about this court case and still that not fully getting resolved. We love Lyle not because he can speak or sing, but because he taught us what it meant to really care for someone and what it meant to love unconditionally. And he also showed us how to love well. Thank you for listening to my analysis of Lyle, Crocodile. Again, please feel free to comment below and let me know what you think. I will see you in the next one.